Welcome to the Unearthed Man Podcast, the journey to becoming a conscious man. Hey all, Stephen here, and welcome to episode 62 of the Unearthed Man Podcast. Now, how good was the chat last week with James? I always love it when we both have moments of clarity during a podcast episode about what has occurred in our lives post the interview, and also how James described it. Post the interview, James pretty much described it as almost a form of therapy, which is interesting when we all have some post-interview conversations. Now, definitely that's something I'll agree with him on that, because I find after I've had that chat with guys that I feel I've had a bit of a therapy session as well. So a lot of value comes out of it. So now recently I've had the opportunity to spend time in the company of an Aboriginal man. The one thing that struck me was how softly spoken he was. This was further iterated by a conversation with Anthony Hayward, who appeared on episode 59 of the podcast. When I further explored this, looking back over previous conversations I have had and the information contained in the books I've read, it is evident that the First Nations peoples are a gentle, quietly spoken nation of people. History, through their storylines, will tell they lived amicably and in peace with the neighbouring mobs. Sure, there was times of conflict, and some mobs were more prominent than others. However, there was no real territorial wars that we have witnessed in Western and Eastern societies. Now, sitting in the company of First Nations people and yarning about life today and what it must have been like thousands of years ago is an absolute pleasure. It's on this point I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, another shout out to our great sponsor at Surf Coast Wellness Rooms based in Torquay, Victoria, Australia. As men, we spend much time looking after and caring for others and very little time on self-care. So you now have an opportunity to change all that. Using the code TheUnearthedMan10 when booking, you will receive a 10% discount on any of their services, including float tanks, infrared saunas, massages and salt therapy. It's great to use before or after a day at the beach. You can find a link to their website and the code below. Here's a few things to run through before we kick off with today's guest. First, the Unearthed Man community, of which my guest today is a member, is comprised of men willing to support and be supported by other men. And it continues to grow on a weekly basis. So if you are a man or know of a man who's seeking his tribe or his community, then please use the link in the show notes below to sign up. Alternatively, you can message me via any of my social media channels. Secondly, please subscribe to the podcast via your preferred app and leave a review. The quickest way to enable the podcast to become more accessible worldwide is to receive a 5-star review. By doing this, you also acknowledge and thank my guests for their time, effort, and wisdom. And finally, if you're a man struggling with a daily grind, have constant feelings of guilt, shame or anxiety, feeling irritated or frustrated and lost track of who you are, and have a deep inner sense that there is more to life than this, then expressions of interest for my 8-week men's program is now open. I'm only taking 10 men into each 8-week program this year, so if you are interested, click the link below to join the waitlist as it's filling fast. Alrighty, now on to today's episode. My guest, after working for 10 years in operational law enforcement, moved into the corporate world. With open eyes, hit the ground running and went back to university, and some would argue he's never left. He knew it was time for a change and to reset. These changes included rebaselining values and ways of working. In this approach, he combined learning from stoicism, Buddhism, and the value of attachment with a decision-making model from the Defence Force. One of his greatest projects is building the confidence, capacity, and capability of those around him. Welcome to the Unearthed Man Podcast, Andrew Webster. Hey, Andy, how are you, mate?
Good, Stephen. Great to be here.
I'm actually really excited to have you here because, we built up a friendship. We got to work on a project together a few years ago. And Andy and I, Andy was a risk manager and I was one of the delivery managers, and we decided we should actually catch up, probably on a weekly basis just to see where things were at. What actually took place in those hour meetings was we actually got to know each other quite personally, and we actually probably spent as much time talking about just where we're at, with shared interests about, things like Buddhism and Stoicism and where we're at. So it's awesome to have you here, and we're actually doing a face-to-face chat, which is even more exciting because I don't really get to do many of those. So Andy's come down to our beautiful house and spending time, so it's great to see you, man.
It's fantastic, Stephen, and to see you in person is always a wonder. I do recall with such love the time that we spent together at that cafe in Docklands, with the first couple of minutes talking work and then just suddenly diving into ourselves and our experiences and the similarities that we have and the experiences that we've gone through.
Yeah, and one thing that I've sort of noticed over the time is just the growth in both of us. You know, I know that we recently had a chance to catch up at a friend's birthday party, and we got talking, and I know I want to get back into your journey, but one of the things we were talking about was just your approach into people. You'd been away on holidays for a period of time, and there's a guy who, when you got back, was a bit anxious about the fact that he hadn't got something done, and just your change in pattern and approach in how you spoke with him. Do you want to sort of chat about that story a little bit, just about how your mindset had changed over a period of time?
Yeah, for me, it's about, sort of, there's that saying that you have two lives, and the first one or the second one starts when you realize you've only got one. And for me, it's about realizing and acknowledging that we're here for a good time, a fun time, and for those that want to make an impact, but we're not here for a long time. And so part of my sort of experience that I've recently had, and I sort of had this twice. Once when I walked the Camino in Spain, the other time when I've just came back from holidays recently, by spending an extended period of time away and disconnected from your norm, you can actually there's a lot of introspection and a lot of thinking and reflecting as to, well, am I content where I am? Is this what I thought I would be doing? Am I happy if this continues for another period of years? And so those are just magical moments to have. And I encourage everyone to actually take a decent break regularly so that you can continually check in with yourself and not have to have a moment like when I had my close experience with burnout. I would rather have not had that. I'm grateful to a degree that I did have that, but I would prefer not to have had that, and to be able to have these smaller moments where you can just stop, reflect, check in, and almost pull your life's compass up and say, am I heading in the direction that I want to be?
Yeah. So the conversation that we also had was that this guy was rather nervous about what your reaction was going to be in relation to a task that he was going to finish while you're away on leave, and and the fact of how you approach back into it. And I think that's one thing for us to understand as we go through life. We get the ability to impact people two ways every single day. It's in a negative aspect or as in a positive aspect. And the negative aspect is something that's probably something we haven't dealt with ourselves. And the positive aspect is that we're actually in a good emotional state. And I remember you saying to me that pretty much this guy is really anxious, and you sort of said, hey, it's okay. It's actually not due for a month's period of time. And this guy's reaction was almost like, the tension started to just come out of it. So you want to talk a bit more as to how you might have done that in the past and now where you're at with having those conversations.
Yeah, certainly. So 10 years ago, it would have been a very different conversation. It would have been come in, sit down, let's have a formal chat. Let's understand what's happened and why you have or have not delivered on X. Realistically, it's not rocket science. It's not it's not brain surgery. So it's just actually understanding, okay, well, if this did not get done, what happened? And it's with a genuine level of inquiry, though, Stephen. Well, what happened? What was it? Did I not give you permission? Did I not have I not provided the right advice or training or guidance? Have I not given you the right tooling? Is there something there that I have not done or that I could do better to help you to achieve those goals? That's a very different conversation from 10 years ago. It's a very different conversation from 5 years ago. And it's when we sat back and reflected on that, and then subsequent reflections as well, I kind of go, I never had that opportunity. I was never afforded that. When I'm looking at, building people and helping them grow with their knowledge and their confidence and capability, those are the conversations that people remember. Those are the conversations that enable growth. It's not carrot stick.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm picking up there straight away is your language. 10 years ago, it might have been, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And you've actually, in the conversation you had with the guy, was, what haven't I done to give you the support? What haven't I done to help you feel empowered? What haven't I done that actually enabled you to be able to get this thing done? And for me, that's such a critical element that I've seen from you, that I know I've learned from and I've grown from, is the self-accountability and the self-responsibility to go, hang on, maybe I need to have a look at myself first. And what is it that I may not have done, or what is it that I am doing that's either creating this negative situation, or what am I doing that's not empowering someone to feel that they can operate without fear or without concern or without overwhelm to be able to get stuff done?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, I love the concept of the locus of control, and there's a very limited amount that is within my control. What is in my control is my actions and my responses to external factors. I can't stop the rain, but I can decide if I'm going to go out in it or not. If someone does or does not do something, then my responses can be, I can accept it, I can inquire about it and support the person, or you could potentially just lose your shit and have a hissy fit. And you just kind of go, well, actually, when you just stop and think about, well, why have a hissy fit? Like, that's going to achieve 0, and it's going to take your relationships backwards. You're going to lose context, you're going to lose enrollment, and then your communication from then on is going to be distorted and damaged. And so for me now, as opposed to 10 years ago, it's like, well, what support would I have wanted, and what support do I continue to need from those around me, whether it's a work context or out of work context with my own family? Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that's, I think, to put it in perspective, and you used a couple of terms earlier, it's either not rocket science or it's not brain surgery. If people took a realistic view of the world they operate in, they're actually, nothing gets hurt and nothing gets harmed and nothing stops and nothing breaks if we just didn't do that thing. And the reality being is that whether you're angry about it or you're happy about it or you're actually just non-emotive about it, it doesn't change the situation. And it's actually not going to do anything. If you are in an operating theatre, absolutely. Yes, I can understand the tension. If you are in a war zone and you're there, your actions could harm those of others around you, absolutely get that. But 99% of us live in the urban jungle or out in the country area, and our actions and our reactions actually don't change globally anything that's really taking place.
No.
And perspective can be an amazing thing.
Absolutely. And it is about having that perspective. And for me, it comes back to the theory around attachment as well. So if I subscribed and got angry or frustrated and attached myself to that example, well, that's like drinking the poison and expecting it to affect you. It's like, well, that's just going to upset me. It's going to upset my sleep. It's going to upset me for the rest of the day. It's going to upset my ability to focus and get into flow. Why would I consciously want that? And so I make the decisions and make decisions, almost on a daily basis. Well, what am I going to accept, and what am I going to just let it be?
Yeah. Yeah. You use the word inquiry earlier on as well. And I think that's, for me, is a really key element. There's 2 levels of inquiry. There's inquiring into others as to what might be happening with them as to why certain things don't take place. But we spend less time inquiring to ourselves as to, I wonder why I'm reacting this way.
Absolutely.
I wonder where is this frustration? Where is my own fear? Where is my own desire for perfectionism? Where's my own, fear of, if they didn't do something right, does that mean I haven't done something right and therefore I'm going to get in trouble? And where has all that come from? And so, yeah, my thought is we probably don't spend as much time as we could. Some do, but others, maybe it's a suggestion for people to go, rather than when we're inquiring about why other people haven't done things, that we spend time inquiring as to why we didn't do things, or what role did we play in a certain situation.
And then we also spend more time wondering what other people are thinking that's none of our business. There's that good old Hallmark greeting card of you go into debt to buy things to impress people that you don't like, that don't think about you. And for me, it's a very similar premise, Stephen. It's like, well, I don't want that negativity. I don't want that overdraft. I don't want that thought in my head. And if someone likes me, great. If someone doesn't like me, okay, cool, not a problem. Not everyone does, and I'm at peace with that. But I'm not going to think about and wonder and lay awake at night going, why doesn't that person, or why does that person think that way?
Yeah. So were you a person that always had that mindset?
No.
Or is that something that's sort of you're
Absolutely.
now getting to in this situation?
Yeah, no. So that's I'm not going to say relatively new, but it's certainly a lot being refined. I took a couple of months leave. I think I was away for about 2 months back in the early 2010s, and walked the Camino de Santiago across Spain. So you walk from coast to coast across Spain. And some days it's just walking 30, 35 kilometers to an open plain with your pack on your back, and you just walk to the next village and stay the night, rinse and repeat. And if you do the full journey, it's about an 8-week.
Okay.
But I did a 3-week. I sort of started in the middle of Spain. So I want to go back and finish the part where you cross the Pyrenees, but there's about 4 weeks or so just walking open plain. And for timing wise, I just started at a city called Leon, and then walk to the end. And that for me was a real big game changer for me in terms of some of my mindset, my thinking, and my approach to life, and really sort of resetting my own internal compass. So before then, I was a different person, and I'm not saying you'll have instant change overnight. It's certainly not a Pantene commercial, but it certainly does help it certainly does help because it's just you and your thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you can really just do a lot of thinking. And the scenery is beautiful and it's amazing. Is it inspirational? Absolutely. Is it hard work? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Yep. And that's why in Spain, a lot of, particularly walking the last 100 kilometers, is the Spanish version of coming of age. So particularly a lot of young men will go, and a lot of young people now will go and particularly walk the last 4 days, which is about 100 kilometers, because it is such a really interesting, semi-magical experience.
Yeah.
But before then, yeah, like I said, I was a very different person. And I was talking to my husband, and it turns out that before we even knew each other, we lived 6 houses away from each other.
Right. Okay.
5 houses up, 1 street back. And we were effectively neighbours for about 3 or 4 years. And we were talking the other day about, well, isn't it interesting that we were so close, but we never met, we didn't know each other. And both of our responses almost in sync were like, but you wouldn't have liked me then, or I was a different person then, or we wouldn't have gotten along then.
Yeah.
And I think that's just, everyone just has their own journey, their own story, their own growth. But definitely back then I was a different person, and you grow and you mature and you work out what's important to you and what's important to life.
Yeah. So just a point, maturity doesn't actually equal age either.
Absolutely
You can have some very mature young people who have started to, take control of their own emotions and deal with their stuff. And then some of us, older generation, it probably took us a little bit longer to get there. But, I would say I'm maturing now. So I'm like getting that nice red wine.
Yeah.
When you went on that journey, and because some of the themes that pop up a few times on the podcast we chat about is the difference between solitude and isolation. So when you went on that journey, was the initial intent that you had to get away and you just needed to be isolated, or was this a deliberate, I need to get time and solitude on my own to actually go and discover who I am?
I would say more solitude. It definitely wasn't isolation, because I went at that time with a mate and we did the walk together. Now, it's more solitude and more of a challenge as well. Like, this is something that I don't normally do. I was a scout growing up, so I was familiar with hiking, familiar with camping. But walking across a foreign country where you don't speak the language, where you read stories about people saying, well, there were so many, it's effectively a pilgrimage of St. James. So I'll refer to it as a pilgrimage, although I didn't do it for religious reasons, where sometimes if there's a lot of pilgrims, when you get to your town that you're going to stop at, there may not be a bed. And so you may be sleeping on the ground, in a street, in a barn, in the forest on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was really stepping out of the old me that would plan spontaneous fun. One of my aunties would joke that I would plan spontaneous fun because I was so everything's on a to-do list. Every jar has a label, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, it was just kind of, okay, well, how, this is not what I want in 10 years. So what's a step that I can take to really get me out of that comfort zone?
Yeah. I like that.
It was almost immersion as opposed to isolation.
Well, the interesting you talk about, the thing that came up in my mind is there's this rites of passage that we've lost in Western society. But you're right. So in Spain, that last 100 kilometers, the way a boy becomes a man. In other cultures, it's going out and spending 4 days with water only, sleeping bag water, or just, finding a place to go and sleep. And, they say in days 3 or 4 is when the spirits will come to you and actually help guide you where you need to go and actually help you move forward. So for me, it sounded like that your journey became somewhat a rite of passage at a critical part in your life. Is that how you would see it as well? Or?
Yeah. And then even just stopping and reflecting to understand when and where I grew up. For me, without sounding like an idiot, a rite of passage was going to Chadstone at 2 a.m. in the morning during 24-hour shopping coming up to Christmas. You had to have done that once in your life.
Yep.
And then I sit here now as a 40-something-year-old going, what the? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
But you always, you always had to. People always bring it up.
Yeah, that's right. It's like when did you first burn out in the car?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at me, it's a rite of passage, but it's just a boy being a boy.
Yeah,
it's not just because you got a license. You're like, hey, I've done a burnout, I control a car, I'm a boy, become a man. You're just a boy that's actually just still becoming a boy and working way through. So let's journey back then. So so that's 2010, which is 13 years ago. So where did your journey in life start? What did it actually look like for you, as a young guy growing up, family life and everything else? What did that, primary school, secondary school, can we go back through those eras and see? Yeah. Because I know we also, at some point you dropped into law enforcement, which I think I know you can't go into detail on that because of the nature of it. But yeah, there's also elements of that we'd like to explore, or I'd like to explore.
Yeah, of course. I had a very atypical, Australian, for want of a better word, experience. I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Went to a religious primary school. The family was not overly religious, but religious at that time, and that was just across the road from home, which was a very, very short commute. And then went on to to Vermont Secondary College, which was the high school in the area, and so went through there. Primary school was primary school. There's sort of nothing material around that. High school was a very different experience for me.
Okay.
I relate to Gary Vay's comments that he didn't fail school failed him.
Yep.
At the time that I was at this school, it was very sports focused, and being not overly sporty and not a really deep academic. There's this sort of the middle bell, so the middle part of the bell curve that you can just get washed away in.
Yeah.
And I feel that I definitely fell into that. I didn't enjoy school particularly. Okay. I did the subjects that I wanted to do. Finished year 12. I was looking at leaving early and doing a chefing apprenticeship. And becoming a chef and working in kitchens and traveling. Mm-hmm. And then there were a few teachers that were really pivotal in that early stage of my life.
Yep.
One of them was a career counsellor who was like, I get it, but just do year 12. Please do year 12. And the other was a teacher called Michelle Bridges, who taught business and small business and accounting.
Okay.
And she actually invested time into me. But the rest of the process, I just felt really, really let down.
Okay. Yeah.
Which was uncanny, because then when I finished school and then started working, I then went to university. And I went to university. The irony of the Australian education system is, as a 21-year-old, you're considered a mature age student. So that worked in my favour. So I actually then went without an undergrad to go in and do a postgrad. So I was working at the time for customs and went in to do a postgrad master's in criminal justice.
Okay.
And so it was interesting, even just sitting back and talking to mum and some others about it, going, but you weren't overly studious. it's where, at that time it was like, well, I don't understand how you managed to get into postgraduate. We don't know how you're going to go with doing your masters, all those sorts of things. So schooling and those teenagers years were certainly interesting. The whole the coming of age, the rite of passage, we don't really have that.
No.
And if there were something like that back in our community, back in that time, I often wonder what would be different.
Yeah.
But I also acknowledge, well, I can't change the past. So I'm just going to continue to look forward.
Yeah, yeah. But you've got, through your relationship and everything else, you've got sort of a version of adopted kids, and you've actually got, I suppose, I'm not what the right way to put it, almost donated kids. So you guys have donated, so other families could have babies and everything else. Yeah. So is there an opportunity even in that space? I mean, how would you see that? Because you've got, nephews, nieces, different people growing up. Like, how would you now apply a rite of passage? Like, if there's something you could change in their life, what do you think we would look to do to actually help them understand a rite of passage?
So for me, the rite of passage is based around an experience. Mm-hmm. And what I see at the moment with friends and friends as kids and the like, is that it can be very materialistic. And what we try to do with our families and our nieces and nephews, we being Paul and I, is it's about experiences. So we're not going to buy you a Barbie. We're not going to buy you a new truck. We're going to do something. We're going to take you somewhere. We're going to experience something. Yeah. So whether it's going to Werribee Zoo and feeding the giraffes, or we took one of our nieces recently for her birthday to an exhibition at the gallery. We're taking some of our nephews to the basketball and spending time with them. Actually with them,
yes,
is the experience. And I think at the moment in our society, that's the closest we're going to get to a rite of passage, is actually spending time with the elders, spending time with the people that are within your family or your chosen family, and sharing that love and that connection and that knowledge.
Yep.
I love being able to sit down with the family on a Wednesday and talk to the kids about school and ask and answer questions that they have. That for me is quality bonding time that I experienced when I was growing up with my uncles and aunties.
Okay. Yep.
And it's a little sad where we see so many kids just attached to devices.
Yep.
And I understand and I can appreciate at times it's just you choose the battle, win the war. But when I think about the times that I had growing up, playing with my uncles and aunties, learning from them, asking questions, helping them in the kitchen, helping them out in the garden, even with my grandparents, like those memories are irreplaceable.
Yeah. I could not agree more. I mean, that was my whole lifestyle. I mean, you had one telly with two television stations, so there's nothing to watch there anyway, and there's no such thing as devices, so you were out and about and you're doing things.
Yeah, it was jump on your bike, be home by 5.
Yeah, exactly right. You might duck in somewhere during the day because you actually got hungry. Or to someone's house during the day.
Or to someone else's house.
That's right, yeah.
Hi, Mum said I can have a sandwich. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So you grew up as a twin.
Yes.
So yourself and Luca.
Yep.
What was that experience like for you? Because, you're not really identical twins. Fraternal twins, yep. So did that your relationship? How did that sort of, transpose across? Was there competition? Just really intrigued.
It's interesting because when people ask you what's it like being a twin, my first response is, I don't know anything else though.
Sure.
So I don't know what it's not like to be a twin.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that there are twins in the family, and so my mum and dad were very conscious that whilst we were, from day dot until sort of, kindergarten, it was always the twins. And they wanted to make sure that we had our own identities. So it was the boys. And so part of that is, mum would make sure that we were in different classes as much as we could until we got to high school where you got to choose your electives. And then there were a few classes that were in together. But it was really about having both of us develop individually versus collective as the twins. I think being fraternal helped.
Yeah.
I think identical twins can have it rough.
Yeah.
But growing up, we had our own little secret language. Luca can just make a face and I just lose it laughing. So we have a very, very, very close relationship. Yeah. It wasn't always, but we do now, which is amazing. and by saying, not always, the typical, growing up with siblings, sometimes there's a bump in the road, if you will. But yeah, I love having Luca in my life, and he's one of my family.
Yeah.
One of my chosen family, and having a twin, it's knowing that there's someone else that's there. And although we're fraternal, there is a stronger connection.
Yeah, cool.
Which is great.
The reason why I asked that question wasn't about, hey, do you know any different from being a twin? It's like, I think exactly what you touched on. There's a risk that you be seen as an individual. There's two people actually be seen as individuals because they end up being dressed the same and look the same and all these sorts of things. And, and that can create an identity crisis a little bit later on because it's like, well, who am I as Andrew Webster, the individual, not Andrew the twin or Andrew this or part of the twins type of thing. So it was more coming from that angle about, which I think you covered off about, your parents were really good at helping maintain, sense of you're just two brothers. Yeah. Just happened to be born at the same time or very similar time frames. No different to any other sibling. You just had this sibling relationship.
Yeah. We had T-shirts with our names on them when we were young because we were almost identical growing up younger. And then my hair went dark, Luca's went light. I started losing mine, Luca's kept his. So now when you look at us, you go, okay, you wouldn't say that they're twins, but after spending 5 minutes with us, you'd be like, there's something going on here.
Yeah. Characteristics
are very similar eyes, similar walk. There's a whole lot of different similarities.
Okay.
But then there's chalk and cheese. So, 15 years ago, Luca works in fashion and is very creative and is amazing at what he does. But 15 years ago, if someone had to ask Mum, what's Luca doing tonight? He might have been doing some design sketch work.
Right.
Versus myself, if I was policing, I could have been on the streets wrestling with someone, throwing them in the back of a car.
Yes.
And you just go, wow, that is chalk and cheese.
Absolutely. Definitely. So you sort of talked about the fact that, husband Paul.
Yep.
So what, if you don't mind sort of asking, like, what was that like growing up, 20, 30 years ago? When did you discover that, that you're gay, I suppose?
Yeah.
I'm really bad using the right terminology. I've got to be better at that. But, and was there challenges with that? And what was some of the navigation through that? And then, as you said, you've headed into the world of law enforcement. So, I'm just, again, interested because our audience, there could be people who are struggling in this space now going, I don't know what my identity is. I'm struggling still in society today because, you only were able to get married a couple of years ago.
Yes, correct.
And I'm going to swear, for fuck's sake, that is ridiculous in where we're at. And so there's a whole lot of things that, you just weren't able to do that people think in society is normal type of thing. So, so if you don't mind, can we chat down that space?
Yeah. So for me, I was a late bloomer, if you will. I know some people, have feelings or, can confirm within themselves at a very early age that wasn't me. It's just about, if you have feelings or thoughts, and it's just about, being comfortable to actually understand and explore what that actually means. I think, even sort of 20 years ago or 15, 20 years ago, it's very different from now.
Yep.
And so I feel that, and even, 20 years before that, I mean, you can go all the way back to Stonewall and all those sorts of things, but I think the youth of today have it. It's not as complex as what it has to be. I went through the self-doubt. What if my parents reject me? What if, what if they, say, we don't want anything to do with you? Those sorts of things. Which it's common to have those thoughts. Hopefully now, as a society, we're moving away from that, and there's more sort of acceptance and more normality around it, which is good and certainly important. And there's a lot more tools and resources as well.
Yes.
I mean, when I was growing up, even in high school, we had the Nokia 6110 that you'd get to play Snake.
Yes.
There were no resources, no smartphones, no, Google, where can I find a resource or even social media to be able to talk to people and say, hey, look, this is how I'm feeling. So, very different.
Okay. So, law enforcement. So you finished uni, you've gone off and done, your criminology, and then you've sort of moved into that world of law enforcement.
Well, yeah. So I actually started working for customs first, and then went back to uni.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So, what does that part of your life look like? And as I said, I know that you end up in, security areas and so forth. And so there's elements obviously you can't talk into detail of. But what was that like for you to go through that process? Because being in any form of law enforcement, you get to see things, you have to do things, that can actually be somewhat traumatic and can actually create challenges as well. So, is there anything that's for you in that space?
Absolutely. I mean, the time I spent working at customs or the time I spent working operationally in the police force, you see things, you experience different things, not every day per se, and everyone has different experiences as well. So you can talk to some people who work at the airport or some people who work as a constable that have had a really great engagement, have had great results, great collegiate relationships, and really enjoy work, which is fantastic. And then you'll meet some others that, don't necessarily align with those. And I was explaining to a colleague once, it was being explained to me, sorry, Stephen, where there will be a niche and it will find you.
Okay. Yep.
And I'm like, okay, I don't understand what this means. Tell me more. And this sorry, it was being explained that, as an example, this senior constable that I was talking to, really found a lot of traffic. So they would, be, speeding, drink drivers. A lot of their niche that was sort of imposed on them was around that. Another constable that I worked with, just there was always something to do with drugs. Yeah, it was always finding that. I think I draw the short straw. My niche that found me was deceased's,
right,
and death,
right.
Yeah, and so every day, every shift that I work,
oh wow,
there was either a self-harm, a car accident, a deceased, a missing person, those sorts of things. So when you talk about trauma, like it really is quite interesting. So every day, you get up and you go to your station and put on your uniform and your Batman belt, thinking, it's going to be a good day today. I'm just going to get a few traffic stops, the odd, stopping someone or tickets or whatever. But yeah, fortunately or unfortunately for me, I tend to have a lot of those. We need someone at this address. Someone's left the world.
Right. Yeah. So how do you go about like dealing, not necessarily with that event, but it's the post event, because there's obviously a lot of people around that who could be around, like they're distraught and angry and everything else. So how do you, one, potentially isolate yourself in that situation, but then have a coping mechanism after that? Because if you don't, it'll have to take a toll, I would have thought.
Yeah, it can and it does to some people. A lot of it is around detachment. So this is my job. I'm here to do this. There was an example, I won't go into detail, but someone passed away and I had to be involved with the government contractors to take the person from where they were and bag them up, essentially. And it was like, it's just through disassociation. But like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I have to do, this is my job, this is what I'm paid to do, this is what I'm trained to do. But if you start to really dive into it, I wonder what this person was thinking. Yeah. I wonder what this person's life was. Then that's where it can get a little bit grey. I know a lot of sort of law enforcement and people who work in some of these sort of grimmer kind of environments use a lot of humour.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
As a coping mechanism.
Yep.
The trick is to avoid the coping mechanisms when you get home of heavy drinking and those sorts of things. Yeah, yeah. Which I stayed away from. And I know, and a lot of my friends that are still in the police also stayed away from that, understanding that it can be an easy coping mechanism. But what worked for me was just around communication. Yep. So, going home at the end of the day saying, how was your day? You know what? It wasn't the best. but I'm going to pick myself up and go in tomorrow, and hopefully it's just going to be a good day.
Okay. So we talk about disassociation, which, at that point in time, yes, helps delineate between here's my job to do versus, a set of emotions I could or could not attach to that piece. Is there a risk factor that sits around that? I know you're in risk, so it's sort of funny I've said that word. Is there a risk factor that sits around that then actually the disassociation starts to drift outside of your job and into your normal life, and therefore you start to disassociate from emotions with family and partners, and so you end up going, you use that as a coping mechanism, quite a good shielding coping mechanism when you're dealing with, death and everything else. But that can actually then translate into, not being able to then find the turning back on the emotions outside of work. Did you find that at all, or have you experienced that? Or
I came up against the boundary of it.
Right. Okay.
So you can, and I can understand and relate to how you can do that. It's a little bit almost like a tool in your tool belt.
Yep.
That you can then pull out if you need to as well.
Okay. Yep.
But I think it's how you understand that and how it sits with you now that's different. So for me, it's around attachment, and am I going to have attachment with this or not?
Yeah.
Versus am I going to disassociate from this?
Okay.
So there are still some memories that I can't disassociate from.
Yep.
One of the first crime scenes I went to was quite horrific, and that memory will be with me. And, can I repress it? I don't know. I haven't really tried, but I know that that's always going to be with me. The first time I had to hold someone while they were cut down, that memory will stay with me forever. Yeah. And for me, at the time, you go, oh, I wish I didn't have to experience this. But I did. And so what's next? What am I going to do with this? Well, I'm going to make sure that I will listen to people if they need to talk to me.
Yep.
I will make sure that I talk to people if I need to talk to someone. And I will understand that this is part of life, but I can take a stand and make a difference in other people's lives so that, we can hopefully remove or mitigate this as much as what we can. So that's how I've chose to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think that works actually quite well. And I think, as you said, you did use the word repress, but I think there's a risk around that. It's not about repressing it. It's about just seeing it for what it is, and even going, I'll have this memory, but I can remember it as an event, but I don't necessarily, again, have to have that attachment of a certain set of emotions to that event. And I think that's a key thing for people to move on. Just want to, again, I'm going to wind way back to something you said way earlier. Because I know I recently, reviewed where I was at in life, and I probably was a bit dismissive of what took place for me in 2018, but I actually had a breakdown. Like I literally emotionally hit the wall, and you had to change. You said that you had a near breakdown, near burnout. Don't know whereabouts that was in this period of time, but what did that look like for you? Because I'm interested as to what led up to the burnout, because often that's about us just constantly storing and not being able to, we are repressing and we are suppressing, we're not expressing. And it just slowly builds up to the point where, we have this near burnout. So what was that like for you, and when about was that in?
Yeah, so that was, when was that? So that would have been after Spain.
Okay.
So when I sort of left government and was working within industry, and for me, I was working with an individual that I had a very different I had a clash of values, and I could see my values being impacted, and I didn't like it, and I didn't know how to express it. And so I was just working ridiculous hours, and really being challenged. But challenged to what I felt was my core. And so my body just said, no, that's it, enough. And it almost felt like chronic fatigue
Okay.
Like I was just like, I just can't move.
Yeah.
Or don't want to. So took a week off work, which is great, and left shortly thereafter, which was good. And it was a good move. And then it happened a few years after that as well. And it was learning that there's another word that goes with, if we do word association, like yes, and the other word is no. And that word I did not know.
Yeah, okay.
It's like, can you do this? Yes. Can you do this? Yes. Can you do this? And again, that was just, working sort of 16-hour days, trying to keep up, just feeling like you're forever just sort of, chasing your tail. And a little bit of a value clash there too by going, we're not investing in the people. We're not, this is, it felt a bit profit over people to a degree. And for me, that didn't really align.
Yep.
And so it was like, okay, something needs to change.
Yeah.
So again, I was lucky enough that I had some leave. So I took some leave. Went to China and studied with a Shaolin monk.
Yeah. Well, nice little thing, because I was going to ask you about that anyway. So yeah, let's get in that. It's a really funny that word no is such a small word, but it's such an empowering, freedom driving word. And and when we say no, and I think this is where the people pleaser that and all stuff starts to come in. People go, if I say no, they're not going to like me. If I say no, they're not going to, they're going to think I'm being rude and everything else. The one thing you can do is say, no, not at the moment, but I can do it here. So it also depends on when that no is and what's around it. So, often we have plans that we've got set in our life, and someone comes up and says, oh, by the way, can you help me with this? And we go, oh, well, I had all these great plans. Okay, I'm going to drop that and race off and help someone else. I'm going to drop them off. I'm going to pick them up. I'm going to do this because I think it's the nicest thing to do. And then later on, the regret starts to kick in because you didn't really get done that thing that you had planned and you were excited for. So you can actually say, no, actually, I can't drop you here. I can't take you there. I can't do that for you. Or can we do that next weekend? Like, you can still replan around it. You can still work with that person. As you're saying, if it's in line with your values and it's something you still want to do and you think you're going to get, both get something out of it. So it's something that we have to learn that it's actually not a bad word. It's an interesting word that can drive a lot of conditioning into kids though.
Yep.
No, don't do this. No, don't do that. No, 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 no. Then kids start to understand that no is a bad word. So it's also how to reframe the word no to be a healthy, positive, boundary setting word, as opposed to a negative, every time someone says no means I can't get something, and they'll get to, do the tantrum and whatever else. So
I think also on that, Stephen, too, is that no is a complete sentence. You don't have to explain and justify or feel bad. No.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
That's
Just
right.
thought I'd ask.
Yeah. And given that we're reasonably targeted around males and also would like to target young males, when a female says to you no, that is a full sentence. She doesn't have to justify why she may not want to do what it is that you want to do with her, because you may have a certain level of desires or a certain level of intent. So if anybody says to you in any situation, no, it could also mean, no, I'm not feeling safe. And so you need to take it for what it actually means as well along that aspect, so that we are listening. And sometimes it's not a negotiable, and it's not, okay, you've said no, I'm not going to go through a whole lot of influencing stuff. We're not selling a car here. We're not selling other things. So when it comes to people and relationships and someone's pretty adamant about it, then there's a level of respect that we need to have when someone is quite definitive on that.
Yep.
Thanks for adding that in. Appreciate that. So, Shaolin monk up in the middle of China. I know you've, I remember one of the first times we caught up, I started to open up about, my journey and where I'm on, and you said, oh yeah, it's been a couple of weeks with this monk, and I'm like, what the, hey, what can we talk about then? I think that's when all of a sudden our work conversations disappeared. Yeah. And we got into, hey, there's a whole new world that we need to explore here. So yeah, tell me about that experience.
Yeah, so I was doing MMA to look to get into cage fighting in the mid 2000 or early 2010s 10ish period, and it was a really good outlet for me. I really enjoyed it. It was good physically, it was good mentally, and I really enjoyed the challenge and learning. And then I just decided, okay, I want to go and do. I feel I need to go and do something different. I want to go away, but I don't just want to go and go to Disneyland or go to Rome and see the Colosseum. I want to have that experience like we were talking about before. And so just explored different options and somehow managed to find myself down this rabbit hole. And I found that I could actually go and study Kung Fu with a Shaolin monk.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm going to go and do. And so surprisingly, a lot of the monks are on the internet. And so I was able to find a suitable monk, a teacher, who would teach a lot of different things. So I wanted to learn. I still wanted to keep up my Kung Fu at that time. So I'm like, I want to do some Kung Fu work. I want to do some meditation work. I want to do some stretching work. And I want to do some learning from you. And so this guy's English name was John. He just said, just call me John. It's just easier. His English was fantastic. So I went up and just north of Beijing and just spent some time with him. It was the memories that I have from that time are absolutely magical. It was sort of -2 degrees, and we would meet in this park and we would do Tai Chi, Kung Fu, meditation, and then some sort of, it wasn't really breathing, but it was just stopping and just being in each other's presence. And then he would, teach me something, or he'll tell me a story, and then allow sort of Q&A. So I'll just sort of, ask him all of these different questions and really demystify from what I knew as the Shaolin monk from, say, the movie Tomb Raider.
Yep.
Versus to actually, well, what is it that you do, and where do you live, and where does your inspiration come from, and what's your way of life? And that was that. And then again, that was a bit of a rebaselining, strengthening, and getting the compass reset. Yeah.
So in relation to that, like, did he? Was he like living in the monastery? Like, is that where you stayed for that period of time?
Yeah, so I stayed. I didn't stay in the monastery. He did, and then he would commute, and then we would meet. So similar to like the botanical gardens.
Yeah,
we would meet just outside of the city. I was staying in a local hostel style, traditional Chinese style of accommodation, and then we would meet. In the morning in the cold. Fully just rugged up, and just spend the day outside together, and then the early night would break for lunch. But other than that, it was just intense, not training, but just an intense sort of 10 hours that you just spend together.
Are you still in touch?
Oh, not really.
Okay,
not really. But I kind of feel, they say people come into your life for a season, a reason, or for life.
Yes,
and I really feel that he was in there for a reason.
Yeah. So is that when you started to explore more into Buddhism and so forth? I mean, had there been a journey before that? Because I know as part of the bio we spoke about Buddhism and stoicism, but is that where that kicked off, or you already had an interest?
Probably it was sort of underlying.
Yeah,
it was in the current, but just spending that time with John, just sort of really kicked it off for me. I remember. Just as we're about to finish like all of our time together, he's like, okay, Andrew, one last question. And I'm like, okay, you ready? He's like, I'm ready. And I asked him, well, what's the meaning of life? And he looked at me and had this grin, and he goes, just be.
Love it.
And then we shook hands and we left. Yeah. And it was surreal.
Yeah.
And that's just forever just stuck.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's again, some very simple words that we spoke about. No, just be, but they can be so powerful. Just in how that works.
Yeah.
In your bio, we spoke about stoicism, and it's an interesting one because it's been, I don't know, again, how synchronicity or how these things work. And I've been in some debates recently with people, not debates, but just inquiry mode about views of stoicism, because, from my view, my father was quite unemotive, but that's because his father is a Gallipoli war veteran. And so for me, there's a lot of stoicism through that, early 1900s, into 1940s because of the war and, depressions and everything else. So people just couldn't be emotional. Like they just had to try and survive and to live. And so you had all of these people who were quite stoic. And I don't think in that term, I'm like, hey, I'm not a big fan of stoicism or someone being stoic, because it's about suppressed emotions and putting them off to the side and not actually dealing with that, where a lot of ancestral trauma and these things can come from. But there's an alternate angle on stoicism, which is a separation of event from emotion. And so being stoic is the ability to be able to deal with an event at the point in time without becoming overly emotive about it. But if that generated some emotions, then ensuring that at some point you actually went through the process of managing and dealing with that. Is that where you see stoicism
The latter,
from?
for sure.
The latter, yeah. So
mean,
how's that played with you?
Yeah, I mean, the example, if you were in the trenches in Gallipoli, did you have to be stoic? Yeah, I would 100% agree.
Yeah.
Because, I cannot fathom what those young people went through.
Yeah.
And so when someone says, you were stoic, or Churchill was stoic when he stood up and made the speech about, we will meet you on the beaches. Absolutely. That is an act of stoicism. It can be interesting because some of the works of literature, of the literature of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, you need the way that it's read, the way that I read it is very differently. It's not a novel. You pick it up, you read a sentence, a paragraph, and then you might put the book down and not come back to it for 2 or 3 days because it's still sort of, festering around in your head while you're thinking about it. You can't sit down with meditations and read it cover to cover. If you can, all the best to you, but I don't think you're actually absorbing the intent.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's, Seneca's quote of, we suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. I can't think of a more prominent time when that is such an important message to give to everyone.
Yeah.
We're in this mental health crisis where, the world, there's so much uncertainty and volatility, and, we can constantly think about, what could go wrong. COVID was epic for that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's actually put the cards on the table and understand what we're playing with here. Let's jump out of our heads and jump into, I don't want to say reality, but jump into the now.
Yes.
Or the present.
Yep. Yeah. I think that goes back to a bit when you talked about earlier about with your nephews and nieces though as well, right? It's that, there's the distraction through disconnection. I'm just going to give kids an iPad. I'm just going to give kids this. And for me, I agree at the moment we're in a mental health crisis. And I think a lot of it is because we haven't given people the tools to understand, or we haven't given them the support networks maybe necessarily to sit in the discomfort of what could be the current reality.
Yep.
And so if I'm not willing to sit in the fact that there's a bit of discomfort in my current reality, job's not going well, relationships not going well, not getting on well with my kids, in financial trouble, these are reality items. I have two choices. I could sit in the discomfort of those and work through an event versus an emotion, or I could just step outside of those and disconnect from those and find something to distract myself with. Alcohol, drugs, pornography, Netflix, social media, anything else that I want to actually do that actually just says, hey, no, I don't want to really deal with that today, move it on, but we never really come back to it. And I think that is a big challenge that we've got. I think, are we more connected in society today than we used to be? Yep. Are we more disconnected in society today than what we used to be? Yep. So we're at these two extremes. The connection's driving disconnection, and it's trying to work out where we get the healthy balance.
And I think there's a real lack of permission as well. There's almost this innate, you need to be doing something, otherwise you're lazy.
Yeah.
It's like, well, so when I used to take the dog for a walk, go for a ride, I'd have a podcast on, or listening to an audio book, or listening to music, or learning my language, or those sorts of things. But that's actually not active recovery, because your prefrontal cortex is still working. And so there's almost a need to sort of recalibrate and go, we're giving you permission. If you just want to disconnect, you can sit and stare at that wall and daydream. And that is an effective active recovery protocol.
Yeah.
If you want to take the dog for a walk, go for a walk. You want to walk along the beach, do that. But don't take your headphones with you. Don't use that time to make all your calls. Don't try to cram as much into your brain as you possibly can at that time. Feel the sand between your toes. That's more of my understanding and what I take away from stoicism.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's funny. I put up, I think it was quite a running post lately, which is, hey, if you're reading this, please stop, turn me off now, and just go for a walk without your phone or whatever it happens to be. And I've learned that now as well. Like if I go for a run, there's no headphones, there's nothing else. If I'm going for a walk to go for a swim, there's no headphones, there's nothing else. It's just being there, and it's amazing what you get to see. The thing is you're right. Like, one, the brain's always switched on, and we need to give the brain a rest as much as we do the rest of the body. The second thing is that even though we may be looking around and listening to a podcast, our brain's always switched onto that, and we're missing some of the little subtle things, or some of the beauty, or the that bird that's chirping up in the tree that distracts you, or the sound of the ocean crashing, or just little things that can actually go around you that I know I'm becoming more and more witness to. Even the subtleness in the variation of colours in the wet sand. So the waves washed in and out. You can just see like almost this myriad of amazing colours, whereas before we just go, oh, it's just it's just a beach.
Beige.
It's beige. It's bit of orange, bit of yellow, bit of white sand, and away you go. But when you really get connected, the subtleties you start to see become really huge.
And for me, just be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just sums it up.
Yeah. So you've been extremely generous with your time today, Andrew, and as I said, it's been beautiful for you to have come down to our house, and also beautiful to be able to sit here face to face and have this conversation. Like I do with all my guests. Is there one wrapped up? I know, again, you've dropped a lot of nuggets on the way through, but is there like one key wrapped up message that you would like to drop out for, the men and the women that are listening into this podcast?
For me, Stephen, it's about communication, and it's either communicating with someone else or other people in your life, but it's also about communicating internally as well. So communicating and making sure and having those check-in points that you're on the right track, you're following your compass, you've got defined values, and they can change over time. But make sure you're aligned with those. And for me, it's around that communication. So you can do that by actually sitting down and having a conversation. You can do it by journaling, by scribbling. You can do it by taking, like we said, the dog for a walk along the beach. Just being able to feel free and that having that permission to communicate. To be able to express yourself is really, really important.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I love that. Great way to wrap it up. I think, outside that message, if there's just 3 words, just be and no, I think are very powerful words and very succinct, and we can go from there. So again, Andrew, thank you very much. Thanks for this face-to-face chat. It's been awesome. It's been great to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to us maintaining and keeping our great friendship moving forward. So have a beautiful rest of the day. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it.
So, folks, what a wonderful chat. As I said, it's so beautiful to have Andrew just in the house with us. He's... hopefully you picked up. He's just beautifully, softly spoken. He's got such a beautiful, warm heart. I know every time that we get together, the first meet and greet is a big, warm hug, and it's something I cherish, and it's something I look forward to every time I get a chance to catch up with him. If you're looking out for Andrew, definitely, I know he's very active on LinkedIn, so you'll find him on there. Search around for him on Instagram. He's got some pretty cool stuff out there. You get to see a lot of stuff about his dog and him out back riding his bike again, which I love. But yeah, awesome man, very intelligent, and has an immense amount to offer. So yeah, check him out. So I think that's it for episode 62. As you know, you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So sending you much love and peace, Stephen.